Dungeons. One of the most common things that you will do in Trove is completing dungeons. Dungeons will be there since the start of your journey all the way until the end game, and you will be doing a lot of them since they are needed for plenty of stuff regarding your progression. Dungeons are going to be something that you are going to be doing all the time, so in order to make it more efficient, you need to be faster. So in today's video I will be showing you how to speed farm dungeons in Trove. A couple of disclaimers before starting this video. Speed farming dungeons, or rather speed farming in general, is something that is mainly gotten through experience of playing the game. So rather than using this video as something that you should be doing, use this video as a guide that you can do in order to improve your dungeons per hour. Secondly, Trove is a game of stats. Any class can speed farm if you actually do have the correct stats. Yes, there are classes who specializes in dungeon grinding, but it is not a must to use those particular classes for dungeons. So always keep that one in mind. So now that I got that all out of the way, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you want to help me out. We're nearing very close to 4,000 subscribers. And with all that being said, let's get started. In this video, I will be going over 4 different types of categories in regards to speed farming dungeons, which are going to be gears and buffs, dungeon knowledge, types of dungeons, and movement speed techniques. First of all, is going to be gears and buffs. So let's start off with an easy one. Movement speed, gears, and buffs. So if you want to move fast, then obviously you need movement speed. Movement speed is a stat gotten from the following items: hat, weapon, faces, banners, and allies. So it is very recommended to get movement speed on all of them, with the only exception may be the allies, since there's only one ally that grants movement speed and is particularly good for speed farming. And that is going to be the Clownish Kicker, which is an ally gotten from the Death Dream section, which gives a plus 5 movement speed plus the movement speed buff. So it is mostly recommended to get any of the movement speed buff like Orkian, Aviar, Prefect Penguin for magic damage players, and Animated Jug or Wrath the Berserker for physical damage players. The reason being is because of the movement speed buff granted by these allies. Speaking of those movement speed buff, let's go over all of the general movement speed buff, which are going to be Trailblazing Emblem, the ally buff, which are going to be the allies that I just previously mentioned, Pirate Disc, Vampirian Vanquisher, and certain subclasses. All of those general movement speed buff can be used on every single class. And then there's going to be the class movement speed buff like the Neon Ninja Shadow Flip, the Bard's Jubilant Sun, Dino Tamer's ultimate ability, etc, etc. And not to mention that some of the classes actually do have higher base movement speed by default, like Neon Ninjas, Luna Lancer, Bard, Boomeranger, and Pirate Captain. Properly using all of those movement speed buff are essential to speed farm consistently. So always remember to keep them active as much as possible. So defeating random enemies to proc ally buffs, getting Vampirian Vanquisher buff due to hitting an enemy with a critical hit, sometimes getting Pirate Disc when you defeat an enemy, and also make sure to have a flash and use your flash every 10 seconds for Trailblazing Emblem. And if you do have any of the subclasses, pretty much all of them are gotten from hitting an actual enemy. So as you can tell, hitting an enemy or defeating an enemy will actually give you most of the movement speed buff. Momentum is very important, so being able to kill enemies as fast as possible is almost a must. Also, if your class has a movement speed buff, make sure to have that as much as possible active. And yeah, that pretty much just covers everything. Just as a quick recap, make sure to have all of the movement speed buff available, make sure to have movement speed equipment on your character, and make sure to keep killing enemy as much as possible so you can maintain movement speed buff. And if you're using a class that has a movement speed buff, make sure to keep using that movement speed buff. And that covers everything in related to gears and movement speed buffs. Second category is going to be dungeon knowledge. Dungeon knowledge is extremely important, even more so important than actual having movement speed gear and also movement speed buff. Knowing where you're going before getting into the dungeon is vital for speed farming. You want to know all of the spawn location on all of the bosses / cursed skulls in order to find the shortest route to get to the boss as fast as possible. So if you remember the route just by looking the dungeon from the outside, you can actually plan your way to actually get in the fastest. So it's actually very helpful to being able to actually plan your way into the boss before actually getting into the dungeon. This is one thing that it might take time to improve, since it really requires you to know every single boss spawn / curse skull. So take your time, learn the dungeons, and then try to speed through them. Also, using bombs is essential since they are the fastest way to actually create shortcuts so you can actually get to the actual boss as fast as possible. Once you actually do get into the dungeon, obviously make sure to defeat the boss / curse skull the fastest way that you can. Once you defeat the boss, get out of the dungeon just immediately without even thinking it, and move on to the next dungeon. So, as a quick recap, knowing where the objective is located before even getting into the dungeon, finding the shortest route possible by using stuff like bombs, and defeat the objective as fast as possible, and then get out and look for another dungeon. And yeah, that pretty much is everything in regards to dungeon knowledge. Third category is going to be the types of dungeons. This could be a part of the dungeon knowledge, however, this is not as important as actually knowing the other tips that I just mentioned. In Trove, there's going to be 4 types of dungeon objective, which are going to be 1-star bosses, 3-star bosses, 2-wave curse skull, and swarm curse skulls. There's going to be certain 1-star dungeon that will only spawn bosses. All 3-star dungeon objective are going to be bosses as well. There's also going to be dungeons that are going to spawn as curse skull only. There's also going to be dungeons that spawn in either curse skull or bosses. So knowing what types of dungeon before getting into the dungeon is also very nice to know, since it does help you all prioritize which dungeon to go first if you do see a lot of dungeons next to each other. And again, just as a quick recap, make sure to know what are going to be all the 4 objectives on the game. Make sure to prioritize which are the ones are going to be the easiest one for you to actually complete. Again, this is not as important as knowing where the spawn is located on the boss, but this can help out in just completing certain types of dungeons. And lastly, the last category is going to be movement speed techniques. This is going to be somewhat of a short explanation, because this is going to be a niche situation rather than something that you must do. In Trove, there's going to be certain movement speed techniques that can actually help you out in making the class feel much better than it already is, which one of them I already talked about in this video in particular. But some movement speed techniques that you can do are going to be jump dodging, forward jump shadow flipping, backwards jump shadow flipping, lunar lancers grapple techniques, like, you know, in regards to actually being able to cancel everything out. And yes, this does help out specifically if you don't have Need for Speed ring effect. Jump shooting for certain classes like the Shadowhunter Dino Tamer. And there's going to be other types of movement speed techniques that you can do. Again, this is not required for you to actually being able to do this to properly speed farm, but if you want to take it to the next step, maybe trying some of the movement speed techniques might help you out in moving rather quickly. So let me just go over a recap on everything in this video. First of all, let's go over the movement speed gear and buffs. So make sure to have movement speed equipment and make sure to have as many movement speed buff as possible. Make sure to keep killing as many enemies as you can while you can maintain all of the movement speed buff. Also, using Trailblazing Emblem will help out greatly. Once you actually do know how to maintain high movement speed on your character, make sure to learn all of the dungeon spawns. Just make sure to see a dungeon, and as soon as you do see the dungeon, you know where the boss is already located. So make sure to get into the shortest route possible by using stuff like bombs, and just getting into the boss and just defeat it as fast as possible. Get out and move on to the next dungeon. Also, knowing what types of dungeons are going to be pretty helpful just by prioritizing which dungeon that you can do. For example, if you actually do see a really easy dungeon that it is always boss spawner, you can actually just go into that dungeon easier because it is going to be always a boss and it is always going to be an easy dungeon to complete. So knowing which types of dungeons is also very helpful. And lastly, just knowing which types of movement speed techniques that you can actually apply to your character. Like jump shooting with the Shadowhunter actually does help out in just maintaining that forward momentum. Doing a forward shadow flip on the Neon Ninja is also very helpful if you don't want to just look around, just keep turning your camera. Doing backwards shadow flipping while jumping also does help out, which it just increases the actual distance that actually shadow flip grants. the grapple from the Luna Lancer if you don't have the need for speed. It is very helpful because it actually just gives you a lot of forward momentum. And also jump dodging on characters that have really good dodges is also very helpful. And yeah, that pretty much covers everything that you need to know in regards to speed farming. Again, I need to remind you that doing dungeons properly requires experience and knowledge. So take your time and learn your dungeons and learn your character, and you will see that in the near future you might be able to complete 275, 280, 300, and heck, even 350 dungeons per hour, which is ridiculously high pacing. And yeah, just being able to do this also will help you out in being able to speed farm on every single character in the entire game. So let me know what you think. If this video was helpful, or if you already are a pro speed farmer, let me know in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Take care and keep on hunting. See ya.